Okay, we are on it.
Welcome to third webinar of Miracle Series. Today, we would be focusing on the solutions to large, complex, and protracted crisis lessons from the Rohingya refugee response. Through this initiative, we would like to discover and learn from the projects, initiatives, and decisions that have shaped our international position and humanitarian crisis response system over the past 50 years, and an attempt to build future directions and to reimagine the post-pandemic Rohingya refugee response plan. At present, 900,000 Rohingya refugees are living in Bangladesh. 2021 marks the fourth year since their displacement from Myanmar. From my personal journey as a frontline humanitarian worker working almost 2 years in the Rohingya camps, I have seen that the camps are densely populated and it is putting pressure on the host community. So let's hear from our speakers today to explore the strengths and the success that already exist and the changes that can be made to build the way forward for Bangladesh. I'm welcoming Mr. Saduruddin Imran for the welcome remarks of today's webinar. He is the CEO and Chairman of Innovision Consulting. So I'm welcoming Mr. Saduruddin Imran for his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Munia, and a very warm welcome to all our distinguished panelists and all the participants who are watching in Zoom platform as well as watching Facebook Live. Let me give a little bit of a brief on the Bangladesh miracle concept that we are promoting. So we thought that this is the year 2021 and this is the 50 years of Bangladesh independence. And often we do not really see Bangladesh's name in a positive note at the global scale. But we feel there are many things that Bangladesh has achieved that should be highlighted. And that is the purpose of organizing this Bangladesh Miracle event series. I'm very grateful to our partners who are helping us doing great work. We have already done Bangladesh Miracle a webinar on health and on education sector. And we are, of course, currently doing this one on the Rohingya issue, where ICCO Corporation, now I guess Cordaid and Care Bangladesh, they have extended immense help in making this event successful. I would also like to acknowledge the contribution of our media partners, Financial Express and Shara Bangla, also Color FM, and North-South University Faculty of Economics, who are extending tremendous help to us. Empower is providing the ICT support to us. Okay, so let's come to this Rohingya situation from my perspective, my 2 cents on it. We have worked on different aspects with different organizations. And I guess all the distinguished panelists, they have extensive knowledge on it, and we can cover 360-degree in terms of this particular issue. Of course, the core issue is the plight of the Rohingya population. They were displaced from their motherland and had to take refuge in Bangladesh. And different development organizations, UN organization, and other INGOs, national NGOs are extending their help. Government is doing a tremendous job as well. But there are other aspects, I guess, that the panelists can also look at. Because of this Rohingya crisis, the general development challenges in other parts of the country, how that is being impacted. I guess that is also something we should look at. And third thing is, the different work is being done for not just on the Rohingya population, but also to the host community. So what is the positive and negative impact on the host community and the local economy? I guess that is something we can ponder. I'll stop here. Of course, I'm not talking about as an expert here, but I would like to welcome everyone. And looking forward to a very lively discussion on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhaiya, for your welcome remark. And we really, really appreciate the population of Bangladesh, especially the host community of Cox's Bazar, accepted the Rohingya refugees with generosity, providing safety, support, and shelter to a traumatized population running for their lives. And the courageous statement from the government of Bangladesh further assured the Rohingya response. If we can feed 160 million people, we can feed the rest of the Rohingya refugees. So yeah, this is a huge step up, whereas like many enriched countries couldn't manage. So yeah, your welcome remarks is really encouraging for us. And now I'm going to set the house rule for our today's webinar. So please submit your questions. The audience who are joining with us today, please submit your questions using the chat box. Our panelists and resource persons will answer the question on a rolling basis. And I would like to request our distinguished audiences to write their name and from where or from which organizations they are joining. Please write in the chat box. It will help us to see how supportive you are and from where you are listening and joining us. So for your information, I would like to share that this webinar is being recorded. So by joining this webinar, you automatically consent to such recordings. Okay, so moving forward, I would like to announce that today we are honored to have Mr. Saqib Nabi, country representative, ICCO Bangladesh, as our keynote speaker. So I would like to request Mr. Saqib Nabi to present the keynote for this webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Imran Bhai, for the opening remarks, and thanks, Munia, for the floor. It's a pleasure to be part of such an important and timely discussion. Distinguished panelists, moderators, and learned participants. I'm sure you all know that we are entering into the 5th year of the Rohingya crisis. It's time to take stock of the situation on the ground and think about the strategy to move forward. This is not only an unprecedented crisis in Bangladesh, but in many terms, globally unique also. It was one of the fastest growing refugee crises. It started in August 2017, and within a span of 1 month, around 1.3 million people needed assistance. This included the new refugees, the host community, and around 300,000 Rohingyas Bangladesh was hosting due to previous displacements. The Rohingyas have rightly been termed as one of the most discriminated people in the world by none other than the UN Secretary General. There are several reasons which makes it a complex crisis. It's a perfect example of religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, statelessness with no clear solutions in sight. The settlements were spontaneous, and it has its own ramifications in terms of planning, protection, and impact on the social fabric. Because of the influx, Bangladesh faces many challenges and problems, including social, economic, environmental, legal, and financial impacts. Due to the change in demography, imagine the feeling of the host community becoming a minority all of a sudden in their own land, and the implications related with deprivation and insecurity. There has been transition of relationships between the host community and the Rohingyas from empathy, which was earlier seen very much earlier, to indifference and the potential to be moving towards antipathy. The systems and infrastructures which has the carrying capacity of around 500,000 people, that's what the entire Teknaf and Ukhia looks like, was overwhelmed and was forced to serve 3 times its capacity. Local economy, both the commodities and the labor market, has been impacted drastically. The cost of goods and services, including the labor market, bore the major brunt. The host community were highly dependent for their lives and livelihoods on the lush green forest around them, which they lost all of a sudden as the Rohingyas were settled by cutting down the forest. This has huge impact on the environment as well as the lives and livelihoods of the host community. There has been immense pressure on the basic infrastructure like road, schools, hospitals, etc. And huge amount of waste are being generated, causing difficulties in managing it, and thus leading to degradation of environment. There has been instances of high level of groundwater depletion also. The local people also face multiple dimensional problems due to the Rohingya crisis. Previously, they could move freely in their neighborhood, but now they have to carry their own national identity card with themselves to prove that they are Bangladeshis. The security concern has also 2 dimensions. The potential conflict between the Rohingya and the host community and the radicalization of the Rohingyas who have suffered unprecedented deprivations, religious persecution, and other human atrocities. With around 4 years into the multifaceted collaborative response, the situation has gradually begun to stabilize, but assistance has been provided. Living conditions in the camp have improved somewhat, and disaster risk reduction measures have largely been successful. However, despite progress, the Rohingya remain in an extremely precarious situation. The root cause of their plight in Myanmar has not been addressed, and their future is yet uncertain. The government of Bangladesh has been very generous in supporting the Rohingyas since the last 4 years, in spite of it having limited resources. It has kept all the diplomatic and political channels open for safe, dignified, and voluntary return of the refugees. The government of Bangladesh is also the largest donors in terms of managing the crisis. As we enter into the 5th year of crisis, we need to take stock of the situation and plan for the way forward. For that, we need to collectively answer some of the questions, like whether it's a time to call this crisis as prolonged with a long to medium term implications. What are the things that we have been able to manage well, and where are the scopes of strengthening it further? Whether we need to have a medium to long-term strategy to address it. If yes, whether the duration of the JRP needs to be increased from 1 year to 2 to 3 years. Whether we still consider the areas impacted by the crisis as just the 2 sub-districts, Teknaf or Ukhia, or do we have to expand the geographical areas, looking into the direct and other direct and indirect impacts? I leave this question to the panelists. Thanks, and now I hand it over to the moderator to take it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saqib Bhai. You actually rightly mentioned that devastating ethnic cleansing in Myanmar caused economic, legal, and protection risk for the related host communities. And thanks for emphasizing on the environmental degradation in Ukhia and Teknaf areas. You also mentioned the implications while emphasizing on their dignified return. So thank you for presenting all these pressing issues that we all are facing in this response. So today I'm introducing myself. I'm Munia Islam Mojumdar. Today I'm moderating the session. I'm currently working in Rohingya response as education specialist. So let me introduce the other panelists who are joining today. So we have Mr. Abdul Raub, Practice Area Lead for Livelihood, Climate Change and Disaster Response Innovision Consulting, Kizoro Nakai, Deputy Emergency Coordinator, WFP, Johannes van der Klauwe, Representative UNHCR Representation in Bangladesh, Ipshita Sengupta, Consultant, Act for Peace, Marsha Michel, Advisor for the Rohingya Refugee Response, USAID Bangladesh, Dr. Deepmala Mahla, Vice President, Humanitarian Affairs, CARE USA, Shohidul Haq, Professorial Fellow, North-South University. So let's hear from our panelists to know more about today's webinar. So right now, I would like to invite Mr. Abdul Raub, Practice Lead for Livelihood, Climate Change and Disaster Response, Innovision Consulting. Sir, I have a question for you. How are the economic conditions of the host communities affected because of this crisis? And what has been done to mitigate it? And I have another question to you, like, what should we do more in this regard? So I would like to welcome Mr. Abdul Raub to answer these questions. Mr. Raub, I think your mic is on. You are.
Yeah, thank you, Apa, for nice introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. And I think I will try to be focused on the three questions that you have raised. I think we all, those who are following the Rohingya situation, are quite aware that the economic condition of the host community people is really affected seriously. So we have observed at least 3 or 4 areas that really matters for them. The first one is the labor market, where we found that before the Rohingya influx, the population was around 500,000 or something like that. So around 1 million Rohingya refugees are now living in that area. So it created a lot of pressure on the local resources and labor market. The first thing is, the Rukia and Teknaf and even Cox's Bazar is mainly rice growing area, and vegetables and other food items are actually collected from supplied from the outside this area. So obviously the Rohingya influx has created enormous pressure on local agricultural food supply system. And the labor market system, we found that the local wage reduced by around 20 to 30%. That means the local laborers who were selling their wage, that has been reduced to 20 to 30%. And it happens because, as I mentioned earlier, the area is mostly agriculture oriented. There is not much industries. So certainly the Rohingyas created this situation. They also joined in the labor market and contributed to the reduction of the waste. The second issue was occupation and employment. I think some of the professions were severely suffered. For example, the fisheries sector. It actually around 30 to 40,000 people lost their job because of the Rohingya influx, because there was a ban on fishing from the Naf River. So it directly contributed to the unemployment of around 40,000 people that we can actually imagine. And we found that around 28% of the population in Rohingya Cox's Bazar districts were actually dependent on fisheries. So, losing the opportunities in fisheries sector is a big thing that happened in the local people's life. And we also found that the price price affected the people enormously, but particularly the local shopkeepers and sellers. They reported that they the selling out of Rohingya food items and other things to the local market. It was a kind of leaking out of products and selling it to the local market. That reduced the price of the items that they were selling. So they were suffering. At the same time, the price for products like fresh vegetable, meat, fish, firewood, all things went up because of huge demand came from the Rohingya people. So in a sense, this was another price fluctuation and price issues that people had to handle. And the traders were also getting some benefit in a sense that the demand for different products were increased remarkably, and traders were getting benefit out of it. But the farmers and others were, particularly the marginal and landless farmers, were suffering. That we have noticed because of the price fluctuation. And the rapid deforestation also contributed a lot in the employment situation, because most of the families living in those puzilas were dependent on forest products. The firewood, other items that came from the forest were actually stopped. And the rapid destruction of forest was a big blow for the local people. So what has been done so far? I think the NGOs have been working working collectively. For example, we found that most of the INGOs and their consortium partners actually implementing agricultural support activities. They provided support package to the people, host community people on vegetable, beef cattle, indigenous chicken, goat, poultry, fish and non-farm employment such as grocery shop, handicrafts. So that worked well. That actually helped the local people to come up with some sort of solution to the problem. We also have noticed that FAO also has intensified activities for farm mechanization and crop diversification. So that is also contributing a lot. And INGO and their consortium partners are have identified the skill gaps exist in that area. Most of the people who are doing so, the skill gap is there in terms of skills, and most of the people think that they have these skills, they don't need these skills, so that complicates the problem, because if we don't demand it, then how can we actually take it and fulfill the condition and improve the situation? So NGOs are struggling with this, but still we have observed that almost all the NGOs have introduced some vocational training, and some people are doing well. The other thing is, the introduction of LPG gas at the community level and also at the camp level has these are the activities that are noticeable. There are a few other activities that I'm not going to elaborate, but what should we do now? In my opinion, I would like to emphasize on few things, like support the fisheries community, fisher communities. We actually need to look into this. We come up with a good solution that actually helps these people. The second thing is, the reforestation of the forest areas. I know a large number of forest areas have been, used for, sheltering the Rohingya refugees. But still, I think a host community can actually intensify the forest reforestation activities. The third thing is, promote the vocational training and education. We have seen that many of the organizations already have taken it, but they need to actually clearly identify the skill gaps and then actually what vocational training skill can be implemented at the community level need to be further explored. At the moment, we see that most of the people are illiterate and non-literate, I should call it, not illiterate, non-literate, and therefore they have limited scope to participate in the vocational training. But some of the organizations like BRAC and other organizations are trying to do something meaningful in the vocational training area. So I hope that needs to be further expanded. The third thing is promotion of digital livelihoods. We believe that a large number of unemployed youth, boys and girls are there in the community level as well as at the Rohingya level. So if we can actually promote digital livelihoods like call center, mobile phone based activities, or web based messaging service, digital money, or data entry or video or audio products making, this sort of activities can actually be undertaken by those unemployed youth. So in a sense, my suggestion is, promote the digital livelihood as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And the last thing is, promote business development and soft skill. So I believe that most of the people are operating some kind of self-employment business. So there is not much opportunities to employ people. And if they can't do it, then the problem of unemployment cannot be solved. So in a sense, I believe that, the business development skill and on like management or leadership or supporting the staff or employees, this sort of soft skills can actually change their attitude, and they can actually develop their business vision to create a more positive environment for income and employment. So these are the points that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Appa, for allowing me to explain all these things in short.
You're unmute. You're
Up to Appa.
Muniapu, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So thank you. So I'm really glad that Abdul Bhai, you actually mentioned some impact that our host communities are facing, the impact on local agriculture, fisheries, and labor market that has decreased 20 to 30%. So yeah, thank you for raising all these concerns and issues. So next, we would go to our next panelist, Mr. Kizori Nakai, Deputy Emergency Coordinator, WFP Bangladesh. So Mr. Kizori Nakai, we would like to know what can the world learn from Bangladesh in terms of managing such a complex crisis. So I would like to know from you, Mr. Kizori Nakai, that what can the world learn from Bangladesh in terms of managing such a complex crisis? Mr. Kizori Nakai.
Thank you, Munia, and congratulations. Unmute?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Congratulations in organizing such an important webinar, Innovision and CARE and ECO and all the partners. So thank you for inviting me for this great opportunity. So what can the world learn from Bangladesh in terms of managing a complex crisis? Actually, some of my observations overlap with what Abdul mentioned. But let me share today 4 best practices from this complex crisis through my experience in WFP operation. So the first point is not only WFP, but the whole humanitarian community, we successfully engaged the private sector. WFP originally provided food, but now the Bangladeshi retailers opened the supermarkets in the camps, and then to support the 860,000 Rohingya population. So these markets are very much appreciated by the Rohingya population because they have more choices. They have more than 20 choices of food, and then they said, they have give them the human dignity, not just beneficiaries It's more like customers, you know, in the shopping store. So this, so they are very much appreciated. And from this year, WFP expanded to install the fresh food corner at each e-voucher outlet. These fresh foods all coming from the local host communities, Ukia, Teknaf, and the other Cox's Bazar districts. So actually the money is going through the refugee camps, but actually ended up to the host communities. So this will promote the social cohesion. So this is also very much appreciated by the host community as well as the government. And then further engagement, now we are discussing with the retailers. You know, we originally WFP has a big stock of the food, but now we amend the agreement with retailers. So retailers, you know, have the food stock for the rapid response. And in March this year, we have the fire response, and we also mobilize a lot of local restaurants to provide hot meals. So in 2020, last year, thanks to the donors, but WFP brought the 178 million to the local economy, you know, through the retailers, through the local NGOs, and also the food procurement and engineering company. So actually, this assistance, I just want to stress, not only to support Rohingya, but it, you know, the indirectly support the local economic parts. So the essence is, in the 21st century, humanitarian crisis, we cannot operate without engagement with private sector. So that's my point number one. And point number two, Abdul already mentioned, digitalization is a big success. WFP, we have a beneficiary management system scope. So each, you know, Rohingya population has a kind of this kind of card, and then they have a QR code, and they have a, you know, fingerprint. During the COVID, we didn't use fingerprint, so they're using more to the QR code. But this is not only WFP. This platform used by the IOM for the LPG gas distribution, UNICEF also using for the soap distribution, and also the Red Crescent Society distribute NFI. So this is, we have a good humanitarian platform. And from last year, we also start using the blockchain technology. Thanks to UNHCR, we have a data sharing agreement with UNHCR. So now we have a direct connectivity with the UNHCR server. So originally, we have the government database, UNHCR database, and WFP database. But it's no more discrepancies, no claims, no complaints, because blockchain technology link up with all the database. So that's also the big success. And then, if possible, we also, you know, want to expand to not only food, but also the non-food and any other assistance items. And it can come to the same platform. On the host community side, we start using Bcash from last year. So whatever livelihood program, you know, just using Bcash, this will mitigate the risk of the cash in hands. So this is a good part of digitalization. And also, the government also asking us to support their government database. One small success last year, we issued the QR code for each vehicle going to the camp together with ISCG and RRC. Originally, we have a big traffic jam, you know, like 2 hours, but now each vehicle have the QR code approved by the RRC, and then so now it's, you know, no more traffic jam, maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes maximum. So digitalization is my second best practice. We can sell it to the world. And number three, it's resilience building with the government. So not only WFP, but all the partners closely working with the government of Bangladesh. Not only coordination, but also sometimes we do the joint program. For example, government of Bangladesh receives the money from the World Bank, and then you know, the government nominated WFP to be a government implementing partner for the resilience building. So, so this one, I'm not going too much details, but the important point is, you know, we try to put the system in place. So in the longer term, if the some of the international actors will leave the Cox's Bazar, but if once we system in place, the government is here, local NGO is here, and also the local communities know how to run the operation. So that part, the governance and the capacity strengthening part, we put a lot of efforts. And also on the host community side again, we're also supporting the social safety net program. We do the microfinance together with the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs, school feeding with Ministry of Education, and also the nutrition program on Ministry of Health. So all of these efforts, we just try to put a proper system in place for the future handover. So my last point is the partnership. In Cox's Bazar, over 50 partners joining the JRP, and over 200, I think, partners are working in the camps and host communities. I see this very good, plays a very key role of the coordination. I've never seen such a good coordination mechanism in the rest of the world. Also, as I mentioned, WP very closely working with UNHCR, not only data sharing, but also joint assessment, and also the joint advocacy, especially for the food security and nutrition issues to the government and to the local communities. Also, we are doing the joint engineering project, again with UNHCR, but also IOM, and we try to, rehabilitate the road and make the bridge, irrigation, construction, and others. We also address the deforestation issues. We have a coordination mechanism called Safe Plus. So this is address the energy and the environment issues with FAO and IOM. So this also much appreciated by the government. So I just want to stress, I think all humanitarian partners and some development partners have very good coordination with the government, Triple-RC office, camping church. Whenever new challenges come, new arrivals, camp relocation, and any issues, we have a very good information sharing, and we jointly address those challenges. My one last point, host community, because of this COVID lockdown, so many casual laborers and tum-tum drivers lost their income. So actually tomorrow, Deputy Commissioner Office launched a joint program with WFP for the special support to cover the 100,000 households in the whole Cox's Bazar 8 sub-districts. So the good relation and partnership with the government and all the humanitarian community is what we can appeal to the rest of the world. So I stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koziro Nakai. You rightly mentioned and appreciated the contribution and the assistance of the local people of Bangladesh in this response. And you also highly appreciated the coordination and the intervention of Bangladesh government for making this response a successful one, and also tackling all the challenges that we all are facing collectively while tackling one of the largest responses in this world. So thanks for your remarks. This time I would like to invite Mr. Johannes van der Klauwe, representative, UNHCR representation in Bangladesh. So Mr. Johannes, I have a question for you, like lessons learned from other crises that you already have experiences, because you have like years and years of experiences in emergencies, and how Bangladesh can find interim solutions to help prepare Rohingya refugees for return, which is like one of the pressing questions for all of us. So we would like to hear from you, Mr. Johannes. While Mr. Johannes is coming on the screen, I'm highly appreciating our audiences for all the thoughtful questions that you are putting in the chat box. We are taking notes of these questions, and we will get back to the most relevant questions right after the discussion. So here I would like to welcome Mr. Johannes van der Klauwe, representative, UNHCR representation in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much, Munia, and good afternoon to all of you, or good morning, wherever you are. As the UNHCR representative in Bangladesh, I'm very happy to be part of this exchange. While I've been listening to the other panelists, I've also been looking in the chat. All very pertinent questions, and this really merits more than 1.5 hours to discussion. But I will try to also, in my short presentation, try to address some of the issues put forward in the chat. If you have asked me what are some examples in other refugee operations from which we can draw lessons to manage and address the Rohingya refugee crisis here, then the question is, what are the problems here for which we can use lessons from other operations? Because, and I think the key issue here is in Bangladesh with the Rohingya, that we all had hoped that the recent influx in 2017 would have been solved by now. That this would not have been a situation which 4 years down the line is still with us. But it is. And therefore, how can we draw lessons from other operations to make the lives of the Rohingya refugees here in Bangladesh more dignified, more purposeful, and more meaningful while they are waiting to return to Myanmar? We all had hoped that by now the large majority could have returned to Myanmar, but that return, that perspective on return is bleaker, is farther away than ever since the events of 1st of February this year where the military took over. So we are all frustrated. And there's no point in staying with your frustration. The issue is then how we deal with it and how we make the best out of the current situation. Now, the focus on return should remain. We should try to continue to work in Myanmar to create conditions to make that return feasible and possible in the future. And UNHCR, many other humanitarian actors are active in Rakhine State in all the current difficulties. But that is not enough. As one of the speakers said, the Rohingya are the most discriminated people in the world. Dick Sid, the Secretary General. They're not just refugees, they're not just displaced, they're stateless, they have no rights. So if they are able to return to Rakhine State, they should have their rights restored, the citizenship restored, the access to land, property, etc. That requires political action. That's not just a solution we humanitarians can provide. We can work on the ground and we should continue doing it. And that shows again how complex this whole situation is, which requires in the end the involvement of all actors at all levels, political, social, humanitarian, development, and that makes the solutions so difficult. While the Rohingya are here in Bangladesh, I think we should also have an honest discussion amongst ourselves that we can no longer stay in this emergency mode or even in this humanitarian response, because we are 4 years into this now. We get into a protracted, prolonged situation. But the government of Bangladesh emphasizes the temporariness of the presence of the Rohingya and that the solutions are in where the problem originated, which is in Myanmar. And of course, in terms of drawing attention from the international community, it has to be said. The focus needs to be on solutions which are in Myanmar. But as long as these solutions are not there, we should also work to make the lives of the Rohingya refugees here a bit less precarious, to use a word which one of you had mentioned before, a bit less fragile, a bit less insecure, and a bit more dignified and more purposeful. So if you ask me what in the interim situation we can work better, do better, drawing from experience elsewhere in the world, it is indeed in those areas which have been mentioned by some of us already. Better education, better skills development, livelihood projects with a cash component, so that refugees can be less dependent on humanitarian aid, can be more self-reliant, because they are very resilient, the Rohingya. If you walk, as I do, and work in the camps, you notice how resilient the people are still, how innovative, a number of project they do, but the legal framework and even the economic situation is such that they have not been given much chance. Some of you asked in the chat, there is no access to decent work. The right to work is not allowed to bring us. The right to education, the formal right, is not allowed. So we work in this informal situation. And in that sense, I have to focus a bit on the role of education. We know very well that since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, all the schools in Bangladesh are closed, unfortunately. I would say they should be the last to be closed and the first to be open, but they were the first to be closed and they might be the last to be reopened. That is also the case for the informal learning centers. So that is a big issue here. We risk to get a lost generation of at least 1 or 2 school years not being accessible to the pupils. So we need to work on reopening the education centers. We have now been allowed to introduce the Myanmar curriculum. The sooner we can start is now the better, but we should also look at beyond grade 9, at the adolescents in the camp, that there's vocational skills thing, there is secondary education. And I know in refugee situations it's not a given at all, but where there is an opportunity, we should allow this. Education is really the future, also and precisely to prepare the refugees for return. I mean, I can't find the time now to explain how we work with Burundian refugees in Tanzania, where we did education for repatriation. Also a protected refugee situation in a camp situation, where education played a major role to capacitate the adolescents, finally, when they did return to Burundi, to make their return and their reintegration sustainable. The other issue is skills development, coupled with livelihood projects. We have a number of examples, for instance, of Somali refugees in Kenya, another protracted situation, 20 years and more in Dadaab, where we, through these projects, made the refugees more productive elements, members of the local society in these Kenyan camps and surroundings, and where you met then the host community, you meet them and you work together on projects, and it helps to, some of us said it, diffuse tensions, better understanding of each other's needs, in that sense promoting social cohesion. And some of these Somali who are now back in Somaliland not only were capacitated and stronger when they returned, thanks to the livelihood projects, etc., which they could do in Kenya, but they've also become agents of peace and peace building in Somalia, because they were in the situation of exile in Kenya, already exposed to peaceful coexistence projects and social cohesion. So it's much more than socioeconomic development, but it also has this social cohesion aspect. So there are multiple examples in other operations where, while refugees are waiting to find a solution which prefers always return to the home country, became more capacitated, got purpose in their life, had a more dignified life. And that is also extremely important to avoid that people are sitting idle and become homeless, because that's a recipe for disaster. Then people descend into illegal activity, what we call negative coping mechanisms, criminality, prostitution, etc. I don't need to mention that. But it has also a very beneficial impact on what we call human security if we invest in education, skills development, and livelihood. And as I said, because many of you mentioned this also in the chat, there is the relations with the host community. We as a humanitarian community, we support the host community insofar they are affected by the presence of the refugees in all domains, in livelihoods, in improving the services, in trying to keep salaries same levels, because we should not give refugees preferential treatment and create tensions then. We should look at how refugees live within their community, with the host community, in addressing the needs of the host community. But then I would also say in integrating refugees in projects for the whole community, covering both groups. But that's the challenge, because the government of Bangladesh is not favorable to that. They don't want integrated projects. They want to segregate what we do for the refugees, from what we do is the host community, from what we do and have to do for the refugees humanitarian funding, for what we can do with development funding in the host community. That siloing needs to be broken, but there's a whole political dimension here, which is not easy to solve, and still it has to be done. What we also have to do, and I pick up here what one of the, I think Dr. Shakib Nabi said, we need to work towards multi-year planning. The joint response plan is currently an annual plan because the government of Bangladesh doesn't want us to go into multi-year planning because every year we hope that it is the last year of the refugees in Bangladesh. But the reality might well be different. And it would be much more beneficial if we can have more structured, more sustainable, more midterm, at least, approaches to programs through the line, because then you can really work towards a much stable, safer, and more empowered refugee community, not to ultimately integrate in Bangladesh society, because that's the concern and the worry. We have sufficient experience everywhere in the world that investing in refugees, in their socioeconomic conditions, in their capacities, does not necessarily integrate them into host society. They want to go home if they can, and certainly the Rohingya, living close, they see Myanmar, they see Rakhine State from their camps, and they want to go back. We did just the whole intention survey again. 75, 80% of refugees want to go back. The ones who might not know to go back, and it was mentioned by some of us, are those who have been here for 30 years. So don't forget there are some 70, 80,000 who have been here for 30 years, and they are still waiting, but they have lost hope to return. We need to find a solution for them too on the longer term. So this is a bit what I want to share with you. It requires a change in approach. We cannot bank on humanitarian funding in the longer term. Humanitarian funding by its very nature is short term. It's for emergencies. And we see new emergencies in the world arising in Tigray, in other areas in Africa, in Sahel. I just come back from the Sahel 2 years. I mean, terrible, real emergency. Here, we unfortunately get into a prolonged situation. Then we need to get development money coming in. We can't bank in the long term on humanitarian funding. And I get already the first indications from our traditional donors who so far have guaranteed that our Rohingya response is well-funded and well-coordinated, that might no longer be the case in a few years, that their emergency funding is needed for other crises. So we have multiple reasons to change our thinking and change our approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. You rightly drawn the picture of the stateless and homeless refugees and the fragile life that they are living right at this moment in the camps. While we asked you about finding the interim solutions, you actually mentioned about the dignified return to Myanmar and also expressed your frustration and complexity that military intervention that took over in Myanmar, which has made this situation even more complex. And you also mentioned that Myanmar curriculum, the informal one, is on the onboarding process of informal Myanmar curriculum is in progress, which can also be a pathway to make this situation bit better, and this educational intervention can smoothen the dignified return. So all you have mentioned through this thing. So So thank you, Johannes, for your time. We are seeing that there are lots of questions around the chat box, but we have to go to our next panelist, and I'm assuring we will be answering all the questions end of this session. So our next panelist is Ipshita Sengupta, consultant, Act for Peace. So, Mr. Ipshita, we have a question for you. Like, there are many stakeholders supporting the government of Bangladesh in delivering the Rohingya refugee response. How can coordination among different actors be strengthened to better support Rohingya response and Bangladeshi communities? Over to you, Mr. Ipshita Sengupta.
Hello, thank you, Munia Appa. I hope I am audible. So good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to thank the organizers, Innovision, ECO, and CARE for organizing this important conversation and inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel, and my greetings to my co-panelists and the participants. And also let me start by saying that I want to also extend my best wishes to friends and colleagues in Bangladesh for celebrating the 50th anniversary of your independence. And as someone from the region, I really note with appreciation the significant progress that has been made in relation to socio-economic and human development in your country, which all of us can celebrate as an example in our region. So coming to the question that you have asked, let me preface the question of coordination by saying that first we must acknowledge that the Rohingya crisis is a regional crisis. It is not just between Myanmar and Bangladesh. We know that there are certain measures that are being taken at the international and regional level to address justice and accountability issues in Myanmar and create safe and sustainable conditions there. But we also know that some of these measures are longer term goals, which may not have a direct impact on the immediate lives of the immediate needs of the Rohingya refugees and displaced Rohingya communities in the region. So unfortunately, there has been a lack of progress on having a comprehensive refugee response plan with regard to the Rohingya and responsibility sharing arrangements in the region, which has certainly created extreme pressure on the government of Bangladesh and the people and communities in Cox's Bazar district. Having said that, we must also acknowledge that while these issues are being negotiated and solutions are being found, Rohingya communities in Bangladesh and the region need to be supported until effective solutions are found. Coming to the issue of coordination, I must acknowledge, based on my experience, that the humanitarian coordination system continues to adjust to the evolving political and operational environment, both in Bangladesh, Myanmar, and in the region. Also, what must be said is that particularly in the last year, humanitarian coordination has also been impacted by two factors. One is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has impacted the working modalities, how coordination is organized and how services are provided, as well as the military coup in Myanmar as of February 2021, which certainly has impacted the stability of the situation in Myanmar in Rakhine State and has dimmed the prospects for immediate repatriation. So in this context, coordination can be strengthened by a more predictable framework of operation that gives very clear guidelines to humanitarian organizations working in the response and provide the necessary services to affected communities. Given that during COVID-19, we know that humanitarian footprint and humanitarian services were restricted and continue to be restricted, and certain activities are deprioritized. We must also ensure that humanitarian access is preserved and maintained so that life-saving assistance can continue to be provided to both refugee and host communities in Cox's Bazar. At the same time, the restrictive measures that have been taken during COVID-19 should be proportional, and they should be implemented after a thorough assessment and in consultation with the humanitarian stakeholders, including affected communities. The other issue I wanted to highlight is on the complementarity of humanitarian action. What we mean by complementarity is that when the unique and diverse skills and capacities of different stakeholders in the response are utilized optimally to achieve the best possible humanitarian outcomes. In the context of the Rohingya response in Cox's Bazar, I think in practical terms, we could say that because, again, as I mentioned, in the context of COVID-19, we have seen significant reduction in services where certain sectors are able to deliver more services and their work is prioritized over certain other sectors. But we have seen that while there have been health impacts of COVID-19, there have also been other secondary impacts of COVID-19. So there is need more than ever for stronger intersectoral coordination to make sure that the important services continue to be delivered, and that community resilience does not break down, and camp stability and security is maintained. And the same applies for services for host communities in Cox's Bazar as well. At the same time, we must also ensure that there is stronger partnerships between different humanitarian actors, whether it's between the UN and NGOs, whether it's between the government and the humanitarian actors, as well as the donors. From the donor side, I think I noticed that organizations, humanitarian partners often request, particularly local and community-based organizations would request more flexible and diversified funding modalities and partnership arrangements, which could be more inclusive of smaller community-based organizations who have so far not been able to participate in the response in the same way as some of the bigger international organizations. So in that regard, it's important to recognize the diverse capacities of the different actors. So while technical capacity is important, and compliance with humanitarian principles is certainly important in the response, it's also important to understand context-sensitive information and local ways of working and incorporate that into the response for sustainability.
Right. Ipshita Apu, yeah. I think we are like bit running out of time, so it would be really great if you can just sum up within next 2-3 lines. Yeah.
Yes, I will. So then,
yeah, thank you.
And then I think the last 2 points would be that the role of development actors is very important in the response. While the JRP, the Joint Response Plan, has to an extent looked at the needs of host communities, I think it's important to recognize that the JRP, as was mentioned earlier, cannot address the longer term needs of the district of Cox's Bazar. So certainly there has to be greater coherence between humanitarian and development partners, and also between donors and implementation partner, to balance the work that they are doing with humanitarian and development partners as well. And lastly, I would emphasize the need for greater participation of affected communities as humanitarian stakeholders in the response, because there is some level of consultation that happens with the communities, but we have seen that there is a lack of two-way communication in the response for a variety of reasons, and that there has to be a space where affected communities can participate in the response and contribute to the response, given that they have considerable experience and expertise. And lastly, I would say that in my experience, I have found that in the last 4 years of the Rohingya response, there is a need for the humanitarian community to engage in a level of self-reflection and introspection based on the rich experience that the community has, and perhaps conduct an independent and consultative evaluation of the humanitarian response to highlight lessons learned, document good practices, and pave a more collaborative way forward for the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ipshita Sengupta. You have nicely captured all the support that stakeholders are providing and the way forward, like how to extend those supports. So I would like to go to our next panelist, Mr. Marsha Michel, Advisor for the Rohingya Refugee Response, USAID, Bangladesh. Marsha, I have a question for you. How the donors are looking at the crisis at the moment? And like 2-3 years down the line, will there be a change in the approach to managing this crisis? Like how you are looking into this matter? Marsha.
Thanks for the question. First of all, good afternoon to everybody. And
Marsha,
for having me.
Marsha, just a second, is from the Secretariat. A quick prompt to all the panelists. There are questions that are assigned to you. If you could write your answer to the questions right away on the chat room, it would be very helpful. Thank you, Marsha. Go ahead, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Donors remain very concerned about the Rohingya crisis and have well understood from the beginning that this was not going to be a short-term arrangement, right? Each year, the US government has demonstrated strong support for Bangladesh effort to host the refugees who fled persecution across the border and will continue to do so. However, there is increasing concern regarding deteriorating conditions in Cox's Bazar refugee camp and remain worried by the situation unfolding in Bhasan Char Island. Significant humanitarian needs will persist until and unless a durable solution allows for refugees to return to Myanmar in line with international protection standards and or when third country repatriation becomes a viable option for significant numbers. However, this is not proving likely in the short or medium term as we observe deteriorating condition in the political situation across the border. For the past 2 years, I've watched the situation of the refugees in Cox's Bazar deteriorate. And I think it's a situation that started to unravel, especially after the second year anniversary for the Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar. Since then, government officials have randomly stopped or limited humanitarian operations, delayed approvals for humanitarian activities in the camps and host communities. That is, frankly, putting lives at risk, as we saw a few months ago when the fire erupted. In addition, following the COVID-19 outbreak in Bangladesh in 2020, the government has limited relief activities in the camp, exacerbating humanitarian needs. These actions are negatively impacting the lives of the refugees as well as in host communities, while threatening the continuation of life-saving humanitarian assistance in Cox's Bazar. While we understand the need for precautionary measures due to COVID-19, some of these restrictions since last year do more harm than good. At the 2-year mark of the response, relief actors should have been working on improving assistance that is provided to the refugees, but they have been hampered by a barrage of emergencies and restrictions, and there have been limited time to implement meaningful changes. At this time, there is no substantive change to donor posture in response to the crisis, as we have always been keenly aware that the sheltering of the refugees in Cox's Bazar is a temporary solution, and some of the constraints mentioned above prevent opportunities for a more thorough approach between relief and development. The humanitarian response to the refugees in Cox's Bazar is in dire need of a new strategy to remediate the ongoing stalemate it faces. Given the current situation in Myanmar and following the military coup and the continued non-recognition of Rohingyas as citizens, voluntary repatriation is not an option as the condition for return remains unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha, for your very short and I would like to say, your approach and your comment on the approach to managing the crisis. So I would like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Deepmala Mahla, Vice President, Humanitarian Affairs, CARE USF. Dr. Deepmala, I have a question for you. What are the evolving complexities in responding to the Rohingya crisis, and how should the INGOs prepare for it? Dr. Deepmala.
Thank you very much. Am I audible well enough?
Yeah, you are perfectly audible.
Thank you so much for the question. And my previous speakers have raised several or most of the key points. And talking about the evolving complexities and how should INGOs prepare, I want to mention that we have discussed a lot about the needs of the refugees, the needs of the Rohingyas. I think the issue here is of rights. It is not about needs. It never was. When we talk about refugees or displaced people or vulnerable groups, I think we need this shift right from the start that it is about the rights of the people. Now, talking about the evolving complexities, first of all, for a start, it started with a lot of complexities. And a couple of years down the line, we all know that there is a very high level of uncertainty as far as the future of the Rohingyas are concerned. As previous speakers have said, as we all are engaged, we know that we have not seen much progress on the repatriation. If we look at the physicality of the camp, the nature of the camp, and this adds to the future complexities that the area where they are settled, within the boundaries and nearby are highly prone to natural disasters, landslides, cyclones, flash floods, and every year we all do the monsoon preparation. We've been witnessing deaths due to these natural disasters. So another layer adds here in. And then the nature of the settlements and the really close proximity, the materials which are being used or which we all use for housing adds to the additional risks to fires. We have seen incidents, a really big one, an unfortunate one was in February. And then the COVID-19 pandemic brought in new threats. And I was, while listening to the panelists, I was reflecting this time of the year last year in 2020. Remember how nervous, how anxious we all were that once the outbreak touches or hits the camps, how bad it can be. Of course, the humanitarian agencies, international, national, UN, we all have worked hand in hand to reasonably sort of minimize or contain the damage, but it does bring huge amount of threats with the new variants as well. The other big challenge, which there's a risk that it might grow, is the negative narrative around the Rohingya refugees. There are various theories about how and where it is coming from. We can agree and discuss, but we all know that it is there. And then there are other factors of the shift of the sentiment or the emotional connection between the host communities and the Rohingya refugees, which started from solidarity and maybe towards resistance now, and where would it go further? Now, preparing for the next or the upcoming time of our response to this crisis, it is beyond physical safety. Physical safety, of course, is prime, but it is beyond physical safety. It is about well-being, and it is about the rights. And the underlying word in all the work has to be dignity. And all of us who have been on the ground delivering humanitarian response, we often know that due to reasons known or unknown, due to several factors, oftentimes there are actions which may not be the best for the dignity of the refugees or the populations which we are serving to. So that has to be the prime focus. The complexities related to educational opportunity, livelihoods, income, all that has been raised by previous speakers. I won't raise it further. I would add here is the additional vulnerability of women and girls, the adolescents. A lot of research, including CARE's research has time and again confirmed and reconfirmed that how the context and the situation of the refugees, the added dynamic of the COVID-19 and the secondary impacts of the pandemic have really increased the vulnerability of women and girls. And we really need to double down our efforts essentially to address address that risk. Now, what should we be doing next? First and foremost, goes without saying, in my opinion, the only way to deliver a response which smoothly would transition from relief to recovery to development would be when the driving force or the driving actions of this response is in the hands of the civil society actors, the local NGOs, the local groups, women's groups and groups led by youth and women. That modality of working essentially is going to inform that our response is flexible, adaptable, and is constantly meeting the evolving needs. Going forward, how should the INGOs prepare? I would say there are several ways in which the INGOs should prepare, and they are preparing, but I would say that it cannot happen only if the INGOs prepare. The donor communities, our active partner UN agencies, civil society actors, and I wouldn't even say the Bangladesh and Myanmar governments, but also the other ASEAN states. Everybody needs to prepare, and before preparing, commit. We have heard commitments, we are waiting for actions. So going forward, some of the things which I would say, which we international agencies, all the development and humanitarian agencies need to do hand in hand is, firstly, we have to keep in mind this sub-region's complex socio-economic reality in the backdrop to critically examine the changing nature of the relationship between the refugee and the host community, and a huge amount of work primarily led by local groups has to be prepared and planned and delivered to somehow address or minimize the tension between the host communities as well as the I would say the refugees or the displaced populations. Funding, resources, it's not possible to deliver much without sustainable resources. We often feel that the interest is sort of diminishing. So that engagement with the donors, that sort of pressure with the donors, that commitment, that would be one of the central part of the preparation which we need to take up so that we can continue with the response that which we have been delivering. I would also say that with no sight of repatriation in sight, unfortunately, it can be concluded that this crisis can continue to a medium to longer term, at least 3 to 5 years. We need to plan to respond in Cox's Bazar. And it is another key step is the international community taking the responsibility and owning the crisis, keeping the pressure on the processes which are going on with the ICC, ICI for fair trials. And also we have to continuously consider the changing political situation to keep the pressure on Myanmar to ensure that the Rohingyas who are still in Myanmar, they are not persecuted or forced to flee further to Bangladesh or any other country. Until that repatriation happens, we have to work on medium to longer term measures, say, I would say 3 to 5 years, but it's barely speculation. Back in 2017, did any of us think that we would be having this discussion in 2021 when several of the panelists have said that the progress is not as much as it should have been? So basically we are talking about medium to longer term measures for the next coming years and building on the economic and the social capital so that the Rohingya refugees, those women and girls, children, they can have a future life with rights, with dignities, and as equal human beings. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Dr. Deep Mahala. You focused on the well-being, additional vulnerability, gender-based violence, that added dynamic of COVID-19. You were stressed to double down our effort to make the response flexible and more affordable. So while you were focusing on the evolving complexities, you focused on the risk and also the ownership in the planning process. So I highly appreciate all your discussions. So before moving forward to our next panelist, I would like to request all our panelists to answer the questions in the chat box that are for the designated persons. Please, because we all are running out of time. We are having a very good discussion, but this question answer would actually make this discussion a bit more speedy. So right at this moment, I would like to invite Mr. Shahidul Haq, Professorial Fellow, North-South University, to give the closing remarks from the review of the policy of the government of Bangladesh with the respect to addressing the crisis. Mr. Shahidul Haq.
Thank you very much. All protocol observed. Since I thought that at the end we all will be running and against the time, so I had prepared something. Can all of you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay,
fine.
Great. So I'll rush through quickly so that you have a little bit of a
that would be great.
time because, I have been asked to focus on the Bangladesh's Rohingya policy, lessons learned. It's very difficult for me to talk about lessons learned, but one lesson I have learned that Bangladesh government and the people had done a huge service to the region as a whole. Because when 2017, large number of people were walking into Bangladesh, Bangladesh could have sort of given them a little bit of a help and asked them to move on, and thereby destabilizing the whole region. And it reminds us of Europe in 2015 and 16. So Bangladesh did not do that. The people have hosted very generously, most of the panelists have said, in the Cox's Bazar, and thereby stabilized the region. So that's the major lesson the world can learn from Bangladesh as to how you, despite your own limitations, try and help people who are in distress and continue to host them. So that's the one. In my presentation, I will try and focus on how we, when I say we, means government of Bangladesh. I was part of it for long 7 years. So I'll be using interchangeably both the words. I hope that's all right with the organizers. What was the motivation and rationale, and what is the circumstances that forced Bangladesh to take the policy which we eventually adopted and continue to do so, number one. And what was the thematic framework? Because I think some of the discussions that you're talking about, especially expressing frustrations and all kinds of things, we need to understand under which thematic conditions Bangladesh were adopting and gradually moving on to a sort of evolving policy. And then some concluding thoughts. So very, very quickly, what's happening? Let's frame the problem first. What's that we are talking about? We're talking about a condition where a military and a state has went against its own people, committing genocide. I think that's what I was looking since 1.5 hours. When some of my UN colleagues failed to utter that word, I think it's very clear that it was a genocidal move on the part of a government against their people. So that's one. Now we see that the same government, the same people are committing the same crime, almost same atrocity against their own population. So that's what we're talking about. On the right, there are the camps. Often we feel that all started in 2017. No, so I wanted to bring that in. So that's the camp, same camp as how it looks today. It is not that it has happened today. It has been a wave of people forcibly displaced from Myanmar, 40s, 50s, 60s history. I'll not go into detail. I put it here so one can look at it. Now, in terms of framing, so the exodus is not one-off event. That means the international community has been living with the problem for quite some time, number one. Number two is that it's not only a humanitarian disaster, it's a human rights catastrophe, what they say, with the High Commissioner for Human Rights recently said, and it's a geopolitical game. We should always remember that, without geopolitics, nothing happened in today. So in terms of drivers, what drives us to adopt a policy that the government of Bangladesh did? Number one, we could not go into a more aggressive mood with the Myanmar, despite the fact the Myanmar government and the people have launched a war against Bangladeshi people. So that's the crux of the issue. It was not that forcing them into Bangladesh, but they were also looking for all kinds of a plea to wage a war, to turn this whole thing into a conflict between Bangladesh and Myanmar. So, but we were sort of bound by our foreign policy dictum that, the war or a conflict with a neighboring country will not end up anywhere. So that's the one. The other thing, as you remember in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, people were all trying and help in their humble way, the Rohingya. So there was a feeling that something happened to us in 71 and time has come to repay it back. So that's the other feeling. The third motivation or drivers that we kept in mind when we were formulating our policy was the national security and stability. We in no way would go and do something which will destabilize Bangladesh, and thereby the whole development that we are seeing today would have been absolutely down the drain. And then whole issue of geopolitics and geostrategy. We were aware that there are big powers behind it, and I need not to mention that. Now, this is a frame that I'm using today. I have not used it earlier to something new. Our main objective in terms of policy was peaceful and sustainable solution to the Rohingya crisis. And we termed it as a crisis. It was not a refugee movement. It was not an exodus, but it's a crisis. And then I think our Prime Minister sort of described this politically very nicely that, we cannot just be ignorant of the plight of Rohingyas on one hand, but it is a political crisis. It's not a military crisis, it's a political crisis. And solution has to be in Myanmar. So this is the two things that I quickly found out from our statements, earlier statements in the UNGA. And then based on which we had two broad kind of approach. One is that let's do humanitarian thing with the help of UN and others, international community, broader sense, and also then go into the multilateral and multi-diplomatic initiatives, joint response plans are part of it. And as you know, by then there was a national task force was functioning for 2013 based on the cabinet decision. So that came in very handy in 2017 in terms of coordinating activities between us and also between the international community and Bangladesh. Now, I know there are a lot of talk, research done as to why Bangladesh did not accept a sort of a prevailing model of helping displaced people. That was a political decision. That's why we thought we're best for the country and the people for stability. We went into this model, which is on part the government-led initiative. So most of you are aware of it. I will not go into that. And finally, in 2020, when there was a security issue was coming in front, the Home Minister set up a national task force looking at the security issue. So what that we wanted out of the things. We wanted a conducive environment so that Myanmar people, Rohingya can go back to Myanmar. So, often it's termed as a, return-centric policy of Bangladesh. If it is so, this is what it is. That's how Bangladesh looks at the problem. So, and there are 4 ways we can do it. And I was also kind of, except the last speaker, I was kind of waiting people to talk about rights also. It's not only services, it's also the right, and that right has been violated in Myanmar. How about that? And it's not that it is only happening to Rohingyas who are in Bangladesh. Their rights are violated also in just today in northern Rakhine. And I have been there. I've been there 4 times talking to the camp population. I've seen how the UN has almost sort of taken out hand from the rights issues in Myanmar in the name of staying in Myanmar. So that's the other debate which we can have, and I can give you reports which came out of Ambassador Rosenthal as to how UN actually failed terribly to stop a genocide which was predictable and did not do enough to stop it. So that blame one has to also take, and I think in the ICG and ICC, both the issues are coming out as to why UN did not act to prevent a genocide. Even some of the UN agencies do not still use the word genocide. So horrific experience of someone. So we went into a bilateral arrangement and a multilateral arrangement, and we also went into the accountability justice because of our own sense of deprivation in 1971. Those of us who are still around as to what has happened to us in 1971, we feel that justice has not been done to us the way Pakistanis have done things to us. This is terrible. As a kid, I remember that. So we said, we should not let this happen in the case of Rohingya. And now everybody knows that, they are now after their own blood. I will not go into this. This is the approach that we took. And I think it was also a very pragmatic way. I know people try and explain in whether it was a realistic approach or a humanitarian approach. I call it a pragmatic approach, so mixed of both. This is a bilateral one because I know there has been a lot of discussions and criticism as to why we adopted the way we signed off quickly onto a bilateral agreement. This is what it is. And there's a strong rights component inbuilt into the conducive environment. And that's what I wanted to put it, that we did not, like previous occasions, sort of agreed someone which was not taking care of Rohingya rights in the context of a safe environment in Northern Rakhine. So what is the expectations from our, I'm coming to an end. What is the expectation from our international community? Because government has also an expectation, you have to understand. The way everybody are saying, this is what we expect, this is what we expect from Bangladesh. But how about Bangladesh's expectation from Myanmar? Number one, UN should have been able to, at least they should have made a move in 2016 and 17, and is documented to stop the genocide, which they did not. Anyway, they didn't. They could not also do the same in 71 in Bangladesh. So I'm not going to blame anymore anyone, including UN. So conducive environment, because some of the agencies continue to function in Myanmar, saying that we can't put too much of pressure on the government because then they'll throw us out. If that is the rationale of functioning of UN agencies, I have nothing to say. I'm just flagging it with you. And this is someone who has experienced through the meetings. Also, the whole issue of ICJ and ICC verdict that is coming out, and the international community has to come terms with it. Are you ready to continue to do business as usual with a government which has been termed as genocidal? That's something we need to see. This will be new experience after the Germans and Japanese. What is the expectation from Bangladesh, from international community? We should be able to pursue a coherent, consistent, and human policy guided by do no harm to Rohingyas. Absolutely, and I'm always favorite, given its own manifestations. And I think time has come when the Burmese people are asking for responsibility to protect, which our prime ministers asked 2017, which is UN Western world engineered doctrine, which could not be put in place in Myanmar. Is it the time? Possibly. This is my concluding thoughts. There are two pictures. One is the Rakhine picture. The other one is the big picture. The Rakhine picture is, I think the Western powers have run out of options, human options to help Rohingyas. Only feeding and physically helping is not good enough. It is the whole issue of entitlement and rights. Where are those voices that we would like to hear? Then issue of geopolitical interest. Geopolitical interest of this region, because of a number of factors, have taken over the rights issue. So that raises my second question. Are we already moved into a post-rights era where human rights would take a backseat? If that is so, we have to think differently about the Rohingya rights. It is becoming a failed state. We have to do something about it. That's the Rakhine picture. The bigger picture, Asia is becoming the theater of activities. So there will be wins. Possibly very early win is the movement of Rohingyas and the things that has happened to them. Rakhine has always been an important area. And now I hear initial reports, not confirmed, that there are huge rare earth materials in northern Rakhine. So that is what everybody is eyeing for. So run for the Rakhine land. Earlier it was agriculture, now it is rare earth materials. So there's a great game ongoing. I've come to an end of my question that do we still have to choose between rights and geopolitics? And this is not only for Bangladeshis. Don't ask, always remember when you're asking all kinds of rights from Bangladesh people and government, that how you are dealing with it. So what is the pragmatic alternative? That's still to be explored. Sorry for taking a little longer than I should have, but I thought I should bring the bigger picture into this. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Mr. Shradul Haq. We really appreciate the way you actually described the whole thing, the lesson learned from the crisis, and you put the issue in the light that Bangladesh stepped up while many prosperous nations stood back and managed to elude their obligations to protect vulnerable populations seeking safety from violence. You mentioned the geopolitical and also historical background of this response and defined this whole incident as crisis and described from the pragmatic approach. So I would like to thank all the panelists for taking your time and patience. Now we will directly go to the question and answer session because our audience has been waiting for so long with the questions that they have to our panelists. So I would like to request our Zoom maintenance colleague to actually put the questions up in the screen so that we all can see.
Dear esteemed panelists, you can see the questions. Actually, I have given them to your direct messages. Can you please open your chat room? You can see on the direct messages the questions that were assigned to you. Can you please let us know if you can see those questions? If not, I will read them out for you.
I think
okay, so
I saw the question.
So there was a question to Johannes. Sorry, go ahead, please. Yes.
And I responded already.
Did you respond it privately?
No, in the chat. Chat.
Oh, Ralph, we have, yeah, yours is done. Johannes, there was a question for you. The question was, what do you think for resettlement of Rohingya at Bhashan Char? Do you have any comment on the Bhashan Char resettlement program? Do you want to take that question?
Thank you. That issue merits an hour. But in a few sentences, as you might know, there are at the moment 20,000 Rohingyas on Bhasan Char, and the plan of the government is to increase that number to 100,000 refugees on Bhasan Char. So the humanitarian community, the UN, in my view, and not just mine, has a duty to respond to their needs. There is what we call a humanitarian and a protection imperative on that island. So far, this resettlement, this refugee settlement was created by the government. It's a government project, and national NGOs, local NGOs are already active, but they need the support of the international NGOs and the UN agencies. So we went on a visit in March, the UN, to assess the situation. Is the place safe? Is it sustainable? What type of services would be needed? What would be what we call the protection framework for us allowing a presence, etc. So when we came back from that mission, we said a number of things, but two key messages. We think the government has invested considerably. There are refugees on the island. So yes, there is an imperative for the humanitarian community to engage. However, and that was the second message, we need further discussion because we need to be clear what are the policy principles based upon which we could then operate. And then also, secondly, we need to further discuss the particularities, technical aspects of future interventions, programs, services, etc. Example, there is no protection program at the moment on that island. It is not a criticism because it's precisely an issue for UNHCR to coordinate. There are health programs, there is some livelihood, there's some but protection is an issue. But coming back to the issue of what are the policy principles based upon which we can engage, these are eminently protection principles that we are in agreement with the government that the refugees on that island have moved there on a voluntary basis, following a free and informed choice, that they have a certain mobility, that they are not contained on that island. They need to do some livelihood, fishing, livestock, so you cannot just look at the refugee settlement in isolation. It is the connections with the other child is the main. Third, that this settlement, this refugee community, which will develop in 100,000 people, is managed as in the camp in Cox's Bazar by the RRC, by civilian authorities, knowing that this started as a Navy base. And fourth, that whatever we're going to do on the island should be of a similar quality and level as we do in terms of standards of service delivery, as we should do in the camps. There should not be what we say double standards. And we all know how the situation in the camps at the moment is difficult in these COVID times also. But if we agree on a certain level of educational support, life skills, and income generating projects, there should be a kind of small cash economy on the island. You can't live there without cash, for instance. But if we introduce that on Ras Shah, what does it mean for the situation in the camps? So it's linked. And finally, we need funding. And the donors need to be convinced, some of them at least, others are already convinced, that it is value for money to invest in humanitarian operations on Bas Shah. So these donors are very much looking forward to the humanitarian community, UN, UNHCR do the negotiations with the government on these policy principles, on these protection principles, so that they are reassured that this is a voluntary settlement, and then hopefully they will come forward with funding. So there's still a lot to do. We also need to make a whole operational plan, but it is also true that time is of the essence, because once the monsoon season is over, the government will resume bringing people to Bas Shah. The current number of NGOs is limited, so they need support. So we need to start engaging as soon as we can after the end of the monsoon season. That is the plan. But still, between now and October, a lot of things have to be done.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Johannes. Thank you so much. There is a question for Kojiro-san. Kojiro-san, are you there with us?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is whether there will be any scope for access to land, issue of work permit, or integration of industries and private organizations to the process to utilize labor from the camps and secure livelihood. There are instances of such in Wildlife from Thailand and Labor in Concert program of Mexico or multi-stakeholder group of Kenya. Can you address that question, Kojiro-san?
Yeah, hi, sorry, I may not take question 100%, but let me go. Let's say, in terms of sustainability, we have to, okay, now we make one market linkage from host community to the camps, yeah? But then we also have to make a market linkage from the camps, whatever product, handicraft or any other daily product, we have to make the market link either local community or either internet or data. Some of the market linkage from the camp, of course, it is very difficult given the the situation of the fencing and other barriers. But somehow we have to make some of the market linkage from the camps to the host communities. And then also we also have to think about, we have to balance the support to the camps and the host communities. So for example, we now mobilizing the Rohingya volunteers a lot, but we also can think about maybe we can invite some of the host community volunteers if they income decreasing. According to WFP vulnerability assessment, Rohingya vulnerability increased, but also the host community side, because of COVID and other factors, host community side vulnerability also increased. So we have to address all the issues on the both the camps and the host community and the linkage. So I don't know, sorry, I couldn't identify the camps, but I hope I addressed the part of the issues. If I miss any, please let me know. Thank you.
Yeah, Koziro-san, you have rightly mentioned. We have another question for the panelists. And the question is one of the audience asked, I'm wondering if in coming years, the donors reduce the funding, what will happen? Whatever is being done so far is band-aid solution of taking care of their needs. But I do not see any sustainable solution so far. What the international community are doing regarding repatriation of the Rohingya refugees. What is the realistic timeline expected? What the role of the donor should be broader than just sending relief? So I think
Ishita, do you want to take that question?
Is that for me, that question? Okay, so I think it would be perhaps better answered by donors, but let me say that, you know, I feel that see, as I said, that I think there has to be a balance between what the government of Bangladesh is already doing and how we can perhaps improve the facilities of for refugees while they are still here. But I think the larger question is that what the international community needs to take responsibility for having, as I was trying to mention while I was speaking as well, that there has to be a regional, a better, stronger, comprehensive regional refugee response plan. Whether they remain in Bangladesh or they return to Myanmar is not possible. And as far as I would feel that the international community and the donor community will also continue to fund the response if they also see a more predictable framework of operations and optimal use of their resources and better accountability. So certainly there is a need to have a more predictable framework and consistent set of guidelines that govern the response, which will also ensure that international support for this response continues while continuing to advocate for justice and accountability in Myanmar and have a better and equitable responsibility sharing arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The final question is for Shakanabi. Shakanabi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah. So the question was, a portion of the refugees participants in local agricultural manual labor, reducing the value of agricultural labor. As a result, local agricultural laborers are suffering. They're turning away from agriculture. On the other hand, the small canals, the main source of irrigation water, are being polluted in the excreta of the refugee camps, losing the balance of the environment. So to meet the demand for drinking water, the groundwater level is falling day by day, resulting in a crisis of irrigation water and safe drinking water. As a result, agriculture is affected. How to overcome this problem?
So thanks to the person who has asked this question. I think first I would like to reiterate what Shahidul Haq sir has said and what Deep Mala has also reiterated, that the crisis is not about the needs and aspirations of the community, but I also think it's about the right and dignity of the Rohingyas, number one. Number two, there has been lots of questions around why there is a conflict between the Rohingyas and the host community, why the situation from empathy turning towards antipathy, and what should be doing. I think we need to be very innovative here. There could be lots of solutions, but I would want to give one example which Eco Cooperation is doing with the Rohingyas as well as the host community in Cox's. It's about that we believe that empathy is a factor of peaceful coexistence, which in turn is dependent on the symbiotic relationships between the Rohingyas and the host community. And we have some innovative ideas also as to how do we create those symbiotic relationships, which will answer the larger question around, the agriculture issues and lands and all. I feel that with the influx of around 1 million Rohingyas, we see it as an opportunity for the host community, as 1 million Rohingyas as a captive market for the host community. You have to understand that. Focus on sustainable circular economy over there. Focus on locally produced, locally consumed, rather than bringing the goods from outside. I would suggest engage with the host community towards strengthening their livelihoods, towards strengthening their entrepreneurship, and at the same time, whatever the host community produces in terms of agriculture, poultry, and other things should be directly connected with the market which has been created because of the presence of the Rohingyas. So that way, I see that the host community can see a value in hosting the Rohingyas, and thus can help in coming out with a sustainable and durable solutions to the simmering conflict between the Rohingyas and the host community. Thank you very much for the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rakiba. Thank you, everyone, all the panelists, for your answers to the questions. Munia, over to you to take us to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Rubaiyat Bhai. This is really wonderful, and all the discussions that our panelists and our audience have raised, fantastic questions which are very relevant with the Rohingya response and its approach. So we are ending here for today. Our next webinar, webinar 4, would be on unleashing the potential of Bangladeshi startup ecosystem on 17th July. So till then, stay safe amidst this strange and very uncertain time. Saying you goodbye. Thank you for joining us.
And thanks to the moderator. You've been fantastic. Thanks to all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Now we are ending this panel session. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.